Greetings and welcome to this episode of The People's Voice, produced and presented by Shabnam Palesa Mohamed for SPM Media. It's Sunday, the 16th of January, 2022, and we're broadcasting from South Africa. Welcome to the show. Before I introduce our stimulating topic and our brilliant guests, let's help you tune into and share an informative and empowering conversation. You can watch live via Facebook, the page Shabnam Palesa Mohamed Journalist, or you can watch live on YouTube via Transformative Health Justice. This special broadcast will also be uploaded to Rumble during the course of this week. Our topic today, an open letter on jab mandates to trade union COSATU sparks a critical question. What is the role of trade unions in protecting workers' rights? For context, you might want to have a look at an article I wrote on the 2nd of December, published on trialsitenews.com. Search for the word COSATU. The topic of the title is South African Trade Union Support of Mandatory Jabs Sparks Opposition. Here's the first paragraph. South African Trade Union COSATU has taken a U-turn on mandatory jabs days after the Omicron variant was announced with an appeal for more IMF debt. In stark contrast, AfriForum, a civil rights organization, stated that it would oppose any decision to force C-19 jabs, saying if we support state coercion with matters we personally agree on at the moment, we open the door for the state to be able to impose something on us in future, with which we ourselves might have a problem with in principle. On Twitter, a member of South Africa's third largest political party, the Economic Freedom Fighters, said, "For the first time in my life, I agree with AfriForum." To unpack this topic on the open letter on jab mandates to trade union COSATU and the role of trade unions in protecting workers' rights, let's welcome into studio Pearl Kupe. She is both an attorney and an activist. Welcome to the People's Voice.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Shabnam. And let me also issue a warm welcome to everybody out there on Facebook, on YouTube, wherever you're watching us. And thank you, Shabnam, also for hosting, I think, what's a very important topic going forward and discussing really the union's role. I mean, in South Africa, we know that the unions have played a critical role in the political environment. So it's a very important topic.
Absolutely. And I thank you for honoring the invitation, Sis Pearl. Can you tell us 20 to 30 seconds a bit more about yourself and what it is that you do?
It's always hard for me to talk about myself, but I'm an activist at heart. So very, very much an activist, very passionate about Africa, trained as an attorney and specialized in labor law, hence my interest in COSATU, because labor law was what I trained in and worked with the International Labor Organization for many years. Our office is the one that established the CCMA, actually, and had a hand in all the amendments, the labor law legislation, the Employment Equity Act, the BCEA, Basic Conditions of Employment Act, Labor Relations Act. We used Professor Halton Cheadle to bring most of the labor law amendments post 1994. And then we worked a lot with the unions and the big business to form a forum called the Millennium Labor Council, which was a group of all the big business leaders and labor leaders. So that's my little background with the unions and COSATU. At the time, the head of COSATU was Zwelinzima Vavi, the Secretary General, and former President Willie Madisha.
Fantastic. With that introduction, we're about to have a very robust conversation. Really looking forward to it. Our other guest, Lerato Mthunzi, appears to be offline, but as soon as she's back, we'll bring her into the conversation. Now, Pearl, you wrote an open letter to COSATU, and I just want to I've got it up here because I read it and I thought we've got to have this conversation. And I'd like to ask you firstly, what was the motivation for the letter? And can you take us through what you see as the key highlight points?
Yeah. Well, the motivation, first and foremost, was that in August 2021, COSATU actually said they were not supporting mandatory vaccinations. And so, in fact, the letter was August 2021. They actually issued a warning to the employers. And they said to the employers that no employee should be dismissed for refusing to take a vaccine. And I'm quoting now them. They said, "We warn all opportunistic employers to stop victimizing workers, who refuse to vaccinate." And then Cosatu said, "All South Africans have a right to accept or refuse to be vaccinated, either on medical or constitutional grounds." This was in August 2021. And then come, few months later, and they've backflipped. They've completely backflipped on this. And the first position that Cosatu took was actually the correct position. So it was on reading the backflip that I decided that, I really need to write this letter, because Cosatu is supposed to be representing the rights of workers. And in my view, for them now to promote and support mandatory vaccination, and especially not having consulted the employees, that to me is very critical. I think if Cosatu is going to say that they consulted the employees, their mandate comes from employees. You cannot take mandate without them instructing you on what they want. And so if Cosatu did really truly consult them, we need to see evidence of that. And I can tell you, I've had discussion. In fact, I have a number of messages from the former president, Willie Madisha, and he told me that not only did not consult the employees, he said, Pearl, they did not, he said, even the affiliates, and he mentioned them by name, NUM, all that. He said the affiliates are very upset because they were not consulted. So Cosatu didn't consult their employees, and they didn't consult their affiliates. And he has indicated that the affiliates are going to violently and vehemently oppose the unilateral decision that was made by Cosatu.
Of course, unilateral decisions is not the way we operate in our country, South Africa, also known as Azania, given the history we've had in our country. Pearl, have you had any official response from Cosatu themselves?
I've not had official response to Cosatu. I mean, some of the things I tried to respond to Cosatu was a few things. Number one, I tried to remind them that their organization was to defend the rights of its member constituents and employees. And I said, when I knew Cosatu, it was a non-compromising organization when it came to representing its employees. And I said also, I try to remind Cosatu about the labor legislation, which they were so passionate about ensuring that we had labor legislation that protected the rights of the employees. So now we have labor legislation that protects employees from being dismissed. They cannot easily be dismissed. And what does Cosatu do? Cosatu comes up to say, yes, employers, they give them workers a mandate to dismiss them if they have not had vaccination. They give employers a right to walk over their constitutional rights, as entrenched in Section 10 of the Constitution, talks about right to dignity. And our courts have said, our court cases have said that the right to dignity includes freedom of choice. So, and also freedom of choice is reflected in Section 12C of the Constitution. And this is what I'm asking Cosatu. Are you saying and giving employers the right to actually ignore the constitutional rights of employers and employees that you should be supporting? This is Cosatu, who was marching for freedom, marching for democracy, marching for good governance. And now we don't see that rolling out. We don't see that rolling out. They said power to the people. That's what Cosatu to hoi hoi, doi doing and shouting chants of power to the people. Why have you given power to the workers over the people? It's time to give the power back to the people and let the people decide over their bodies. The right to bodily integrity, what goes into their bodies. So Cosatu, we're disappointed. We need you to represent the workers again.
Absolutely. Putting Cosatu and other trade unions on notice. A couple of comments. Hisham from the Shave says, staggering. Mike Langa says you can ask that again because they're no longer protecting workers. They are siding with the employers now. Well, part of your letter says, Kasatu, again, have you even consulted with your employees or the workers' constituency to find out what they want? Have you seen videos of those employees who have been adversely affected by the vaccine? Why would you open your constituents up to this possibility? Will you take accountability for those who may die or are disabled as a result of the COVID-19 vaccinations? We're disappointed in you, Kasatu. You've shown your true colors. You used to be a voice for the people. Now you've become a voice for the bully employer organizations and bully government. Signed, Pearl Kupe, active and concerned human being. Well, a thought struck my mind as you were talking just now. Is this the end of organized trade unions and the labor movement in South Africa using the instrument of forced jabs? Could we see an end to organized labor movement, and what impact could that have on workers' rights in our country? Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? What are your thoughts?
I don't think it's an end to organized labor unions, and I don't think it should be an end to organized labor unions, at least not for those that are genuinely representing their workers. For those that are purporting to represent them and they are not, yes, definitely, it should be an end to them. But the main role of trade unions, they're supposed to be the ones who are negotiating and representing their members, determining their members' grievances and relaying those grievances. They're supposed to be the ones fighting for the social welfare of the workers. So this is their job. They're supposed to be fighting for the regulation of jobs, so that employment rights are protected and enhanced, not taking away. People are being fired, Kosatu. How does that make you feel? That people are being fired for something that is not dismissible according to the Labor Relations Act. The Labor Relations Act, Shabnam, it sets out instances when you can dismiss an employee. For instance, for misconduct. If an employee steals or lies, etc., you hold a fair disciplinary hearing for them. And if you've adhered by the procedural fairness, then you can dismiss them for a substantive reason. But none of those reasons that are articulated in the Labor Relations Act have to do with refusal to take a mandatory vaccine. None of them. So it cannot actually be something that's supported. The union is there to regulate jobs, to protect employment rights in a country, Shabnam, where we already had almost 40% of unemployment. And now post-COVID, it's now worse. And you are advocating for people to be dismissed simply because they're saying, I have a right to choose what goes into my body. Trade unions are supposed to ensure job security. They're supposed to represent their members against unfair dismissal. That an employer cannot just dismiss their employee, cannot just change their terms and conditions of work, cannot just retrench them. It's the trade union that's supposed to be speaking for them, not the Pearl Coupes, but the trade unions that are supposed to be doing that, making sure that in line with the Employment Equity Act, they're not discriminated against. Now, here's another point, Shabnam. We know it is scientifically proven. It is not something that's in question, that a vaccinated employee can do what? Can contract COVID and can transmit it. It is a medical scientific fact. We know that. And we know that an unvaccinated person can contract and transmit COVID. So if we both, the vaccinated and the unvaccinated, can both contract and transmit COVID, why am I the unvaccinated one, the one who's going to lose the job? Because my colleague who's vaccinated can equally. So that's a clear case of discrimination. And discrimination is prohibited in the Employment Act. And COSATU should have been the first one to stand up to say this is a case of discrimination against the unvaccinated. So yes, COSATU, don't make us do your job for you. You are supposed to be protecting scarce jobs.
Calling COSATU and all other unions out on your point that not all unions are taking that position, Pearl. Public sector unions oppose mandatory jabs. It's a continuation of the article on Trialside News. Not all trade unions are on board forced jab. Public sector trade unions, such as Public Servants Association South Africa, Policing Union, and POPCRU, refuse to support mandatory jabs. Quote, it is
Yeah.
our firm belief that no employee should be forced to vaccinate, as that will be
Yes.
against their rights, and SAPU will explore all legalities around this matter in order to protect our members, said SAPU spokesperson Lesiba Tobachale. Denosa was still out in 2nd December saying they needed to make their positions on mandatory jabs known. We're not sure what's happened since then. But we're facing a crisis in this country, and it appears to me that this virus is in some ways being used to collapse the South African economy, using workers and using our already untenable economic situation to achieve that. Is that something that's tenable in your mind? Can you see it happening behind the scenes? All right, I think Pearl's just frozen for a second there. Let's take a couple of comments from our listeners and our viewers. Deepak Ishwar that says, AMCU, please step into all private companies and kick out this useless COSATU. Marina Muehlberg Smith says the same thing happened globally. For example, the Australian Union for the tradies, they sided with government and not their members. Hisham van der Scheef, why do you believe they're not respecting their mandate to represent their members? What are the machinations behind the scene? How do members address this and demand accountability? What's the practical steps? Can their sellout be turned around? We'll ask Paul Kupe that as soon as she's joined back into the conversation. Mireille Olafir, doctor, it is breaking my heart how many young people I see daily with post-jab injuries. And she also says the young people think they have no reason for medical exemption because they are healthy. There is, however, a movement here around the country, actually, with universities who are standing in solidarity and strategizing to make sure that not only can they access the right to education, but they're not discriminated against or forced into experimental medical treatment that thus far the science shows is not effective and is certainly not safe. It's happening also in KZN, mobilizing as well, while the University of KZN has said that they will not be mandating forced jabs. They will be requiring PCR tests on a regular basis. Now, those of us following the science know that PCR tests are not only inaccurate and come out with false positives or false negatives, but that the WHO itself has said the current PCR test should be withdrawn. Not only that, in other countries, the PCR tests have been found to contain not only contamination at the labs, but also carcinogenic chemicals in those PCR tests. So certainly trying to force students to use the PCR test or take the jab is coercion and should be condemned in the highest order. We're going to look for Pearl Kupe again, and I think she's back into the conversation. Pearl, you're back with us? Pearl, can you hear me? You're back. Excellent.
There we go. Okay.
All right. Appears to be a network issue. Pearl, we've got a question for you from Hisham van der Scheef, and he says, why do you believe that they're not, that they being COSATU, are not respecting...
Sorry for that.
It's fine. Struggling to hear you a little bit, Pearl. The network appears to be dodgy suddenly, quite interesting. But if you can hear me, we have a question from Hisham van der Scheef. And he says, why do you believe they are not respecting their mandate to represent workers? What are the machinations behind the scene? And how do members address this and demand accountability? What are the practical steps? Can their sellout to be turned around? Pearl, if you can't hear me, all right, Pearl, I think you're going to have to disconnect and come back into studio. Let's look for another, more comments on the issue of trade unions and their role on mandating or forcing jabs on workers, potentially completely decimating the South African economy, which of course plays right into the hands of those who would seek to benefit and profit from the destruction of the South African economy as well. We were still looking for Lerato Mthunzi, of course, who is the General Secretary of YNITU, which is the Young Nurses Indaba Trade Union, also a very fiery activist with opinions on mandatory jabs, access to treatments, and a broken medical system here in South Africa. and we hope she'll be joining the conversation soon. Last year, when I interviewed Lerato, let's bring Pearl back into the conversation. Is that better, Sis Pearl?
Yeah, it is better. We're
Much.
having a struggle here. I'm almost suspecting there's somebody trying to hack it or something. I don't know.
I will confirm that for you. It happens every time we have this kind of conversation that threatens the balance of power. Let them try. The people will succeed. But here's a question for you, Pearl. Hisham van der Shape asked this question. Why do you believe they, being COSATU, are not respecting their mandate to represent their members? What are the machinations behind the scenes, and how do members address this and demand accountability? What are the practical steps? Can their sellout be turned around?
Yeah, well, I can't answer for COSATU. Only COSATU knows why they would initially not support mandatory vaccine, and that was the right position, and then do a backflip. So we don't know what happened in the process. We don't. The leadership has to come and tell us, why did you do that backflip? And I don't want to even purport to try and answer for them. But what I do know is that the members, yes, they can do something, because COSATU is accountable to them, and they're paying subscription fees. They are paying monthly for COSATU to represent them. So as members, you must be active citizens. And you must call COSATU to accountability, and you must ask them whether they consulted you. And if they didn't consult you, you need to tell them, you don't have our mandate. This is not our position. We are not in support of mandatory vaccine, and you need to withdraw your statement. You have that right as members. And if you feel misrepresented, then you need to show it by withdrawing your subscription or whatever it is. But you have the financial power, you have the membership power in terms of numbers. You need to call COSATU to accountability. The shop stewards there are supposed to be representing you. You need to look for those shop stewards and tell those shop stewards, listen, go back and tell the leadership that you are misrepresenting us. So you have that power as members. You are paying for it. It's not a free service. It's a service that COSATU committed to. And you need to make them accountable, and you need to make them responsible. Leadership is an accountability issue. You cannot misrepresent people and expect people to be quiet. So as members of COSATU, you must speak out. You must tell COSATU where they've misrepresented you, and you must call them to accountability.
Calling for accountability there, and practical steps that members of COSATU and other trade unions can take to stand up for their rights. Last year, when I interviewed Lerato Mthunzi, who is the Secretary General of Wainitu, together with Prof. Nati Madladla, who is medical advisor to SAVERS and also works closely with the Red List and others, she was very open and robust, Ms. Pearl, about the fact that our hospitals are severely under-resourced, to put it mildly, and under-trained to deal with A, the C-19 shot trial, and B, adverse effects. Now, on the SAVERS system, we are seeing the most horrific adverse effects being experienced by people, from clotting and migraines to disabilities to heart attacks and heart issues to death, an increase in cancer also being reported on SAVERS. And, I've been interviewing victims who are reporting into SAVERS, and whether they go to public hospitals or private hospitals, the results are the same. The hospitals don't know how to cope, and people suffer and die, or, almost die. So, Spur, how are hospitals going to cope if the shot trial is allowed to recklessly continue, given that our healthcare budget decreases by at least 1% every year? We're not going to cope. Your thoughts?
Absolutely, we're not going to cope. And the issue of adverse effects is out there. One of my good friends, Dr. Reynold Russon, has also taken the case to the Constitutional Court. In fact, I believe he's watching now because he asked me for the link. So he has taken and he's mentioned the aspect of adverse effects, that this is something that we need to look at. And the government needs to ask themselves, are they prepared to take on liability cases? Because these big pharma and pharmaceuticals have made them sign no liability. no liability. So they've gotten these vaccines on the basis of having to sign to the pharmacies to say, the pharmacies say, we're not going to assume liability. Now, that is a question right there. As a lawyer, I will never sign no liability. Any company that knows that their product is good, their product is not going to be harmful, will never make you sign a no liability clause. Only
Right.
those who know that their product is deficient and inefficient will not want to assume responsibility for that. So now they've started this no fault compensation fund by Dr. Nkosazana Zuma, to say,
Mm.
to talk about adverse effects. So government, we need to talk about that. Are you going to take responsibility? Because the big pharmaceuticals have said we're not responsible. So are you going to, the deluge of cases that are going to come forth from people who have suffered adverse effects? Are you ready to pay, to make all the criminal cases that will be lodged against you and civil cases that will be lodged against you? Are you ready for that? Are you ready for
I-
that? That's a question
In your
that,
personal
government,
capacity, though, Sis because
yeah.
why should we, as the people who are not involved in a public participation process, asking us, do you agree for this government to represent you and sign over all rights, give the pharmaceutical companies indemnity and pass all the liability onto the, taxpayers and hardworking people of this country, predominantly the 75% poor? There was no public participation process. So surely in any legal action that follows, those that signed and those who were accomplices to those signatures should be liable in their personal capacity.
Absolutely, they need to be liable. And this is something that we've raised several times around consultation, even COGTA. And COGTA, which is, Minister Dlamini Zuma, who's responsible for making the protocols and all the policies around that. We've asked several times to say, we've not been included. How did you come up with your stakeholder forum? What is the scientific basis for making these protocols? We put that, and it's very secretive. There's no transparency, which is also not a sign of democracy. So slowly we're moving more and more towards authoritarianism, towards totalitarianism, towards dictatorship. And we have said, Republic of South Africa, that we are democracy. Let me remind Kosatu and let me remind our leaders that our democracy means power to the people. Are we not the people who were raising fists? Amandla, awetu. Are we not the ones who were shouting power back to the people? Why then are you taking the power away from the people? That the situation now is only power to the leaders. Everything is secretive. Power to the workers, the employers, the ones who are moneyed. But those who are vulnerable, those who do not have money, there's no power. They're being disempowered slowly and slowly. And we're more and more finding ourselves having a dictatorial leadership. And this cannot go on. And I want to encourage the citizens of South Africa right now into active citizenry. And I want to say to you and all the nations in Africa, because I'm passionate about Africa, you have a voice. You have a voice. Don't allow anybody to silence you. Know your rights. Know your constitutional rights. Mobilize, come together, lobby, speak your rights. You have freedom of speech. You have a right to say what you feel. So don't be intimidated. Don't feel fearful. Speak out against what you do not want, and don't allow yourself to come into a place of fear and intimidation. We cannot say we are the ones who fought and struggled so much for our freedom. You can't let go of that freedom at this point, South Africa. We've come too far. Utata Mandela said, long walk to freedom. We've walked that walk, South Africa, and we're not about to give up now. Genoeg is genoeg. Mthunzi, it's enough. Let us stand up for our constitutional rights.
Maibu, yeah. So, Pearl, I also want to talk about this issue of those secretive deals, and it's something that's not, of course, canvassed in establishment media because most of mainstream media is funded by the pharmaceutical industries and the BlackRocks and Vanguards of the world. Now, Pfizer's contracted with several countries, 110, according to their report. They tried to force Argentina, Brazil, and South Africa, amongst others, to sign over our sovereign assets, such as our military, our embassy, our reserve bank, billions in cash, and of course, blanket immunity in exchange for their products which people like Dr. Peter McCullough, and I interviewed him on Wednesday, said countries should get refunds for these products because they're ineffective and they're dangerous. Now,
Yeah.
any politician having signed those agreements, which we still haven't seen, and which I believe we absolutely have a right for and we should be mobilizing on, for me, is responsible for state capture on a
Yeah.
multinational scale. It is state
Absolutely.
capture. It is criminal. It is a crime against the people of our country. It is treason. Your thoughts?
Absolutely. I almost, before you even said the word state capture, I was about to say it's another form of state capture. State capture concerning the arms deals. State capture. I mean, we're just seeing series and series of state capture where certain people seem to forget that the resources belong to the people of South Africa, and they've taken over private ownership over resources that belong to the nation. And they've decided to unilaterally use those resources for their own private agendas. It's not possible. It cannot happen. As they say in West Africa, it's impossible and can't happen. So we have to wake up as active citizenries. This nation, we're singing a national anthem that says, Nkosi Sikeleli Africa. God save this continent and this South Africa that you gave us, God. There's an accountability for us to steward it. We can't hand it over to a few individuals who think that this is their playground. We're going to play and we're going to take these resources and do what we want. We're going to take this 500 million that was given to the poor to alleviate COVID, and we're going to decide we're going to buy our own cars and mansions. No. It can't happen. And we are here as active citizens to say that we are alert, we are vigilant, we are watching the leaders, we are ready to take you to court. And some of you are already going to court, and many more will go to court. We are ready. The judiciary is there. I pray we have an independent, strong judiciary that will be, no fear and no favor. Show no fear and no favor, and prosecute all leaders who need to be prosecuted, who do not have servant hearts, who are not transformational leaders, who are not looking out for the vulnerable out there, who are not concerned about the poor, who are not concerned about those dismissed, the employed, because they're sitting in their fat offices there and drinking their wines. No, we are concerned about the ordinary citizen. And the ordinary citizens' rights must be protected. Their health must be protected. Their bodies must be protected. And their constitutional rights must be protected.
At all costs. One more question in relation to these contracts, Sis Pearl, and that is, these multinational corporations, in terms of big pharma, have an established history of fraud, corruption, racketeering, harm, price gouging. You name it, they've done it. Africa has been one of their experimental grounds for many years. If you look at what happened in Nigeria, or you look at what happened in India, for example, leaving children disabled, no accountability, years of no accountability, threats and intimidation, bribing politicians. They've done it. And then you get our politicians saying, no, we signed the agreement, but don't worry, we didn't sign over our sovereign assets. We have absolutely no proof of that. Is it plausible that given this desperation from government to hit this imaginary unicorn 70% target on a useless product, it's not working, do you think this desperation to hit 70% is somehow linked back to those contracts which may say, if you don't hit 70%, we're going to start calling in those sovereign assets? Is it plausible?
Absolutely. I mean, there's definitely an agenda around that. Now, here's the interesting thing, Shabnam. We are the least vaccinated continent ever. The 6% vaccination rate, and I bet you that whole 6% is probably mostly in South Africa. Of that 6%, I bet you 5% is us. And despite that, we're still not, they didn't reach that 70% target. And what you're saying is so right, because there was a clear agenda to reach that 70% target. When we had a Zoom meeting a couple of months ago, I was with Dr. Nasiba, and we were with the Deputy Minister of Health. And some of the things I put to the Deputy Minister of Health was the Minister of Health speech. When he rolled out and talked about rolling out the mandatory vaccinations to the children. Now, I pulled this speech off of the government internet, so I'm quoting him. And in his speech, he said, he talked about the 70% that you're talking about, but that they'd only made maybe about 30% on first jabs only. And then he said that with the jabbing of the children, that they were targeting 6 million. They were hoping to get 6 million, add 6 million to their numbers. So clearly it was about getting more numbers to get to that 70% target that you are talking about, that has a very secretive agenda behind it. So you're willing to risk the health of our children. In the first instance, these children don't need to be jabbed. The likelihood and probability of them getting COVID is so minute. And then you go and use a children's bill, a legislation, because there's a legislation in the children's bill that says children from 12 and above do not need their parents' consent. So it was a deliberate ploy on the part of government that they went for the 12-year-olds because they knew that we don't need parental consent. That's why girl children can get abortions without their parents' consent. And we need to change that law. That law needs to be amended. A 12-year-old cannot drive, but a 12-year-old can have an abortion without their parents' consent. A 12-year-old cannot drink, but they can have an abortion with their parents' consent. I mean, please, there's no logic and there's no reason in that. So I put this to the deputy minister and I said, why are you jabbing children? But the minister already said in his speech, so we can get 6 million and we can get to our 70% target. So we're going to jab children who do not need to be jabbed because the likelihood of their contracting COVID is very small. And then the minister said this again, and I put this to the deputy minister. He said this. He said, we're only going to jab them. I think it's the Pfizer one that the children were being jabbed. He said, we're only going to jab them with one jab. You know why he said that, Shabnam? He said, we're only going to jab them with one jab. And then he said, and I quote, he said, because it has been shown in some instances that after receiving 2 jabs, they may get something called transient myocarditis. Now, I'm not a medical doctor, I'm a lawyer, but I did research transient myocarditis, and I know enough to know that it is a heart issue, a heart disease. So if we decode what the minister was saying, he was in effect saying, we're not going to give you 100% of the jab because you might just get this heart disease. So instead of giving you 100%, we're only going to give you 50%. Of the same thing that has been shown that it might disable you or cause disease. We'll just give you 50% of the same toxic thing so that you only get a lesser problem, not the whole transient myocarditis. So you've admitted openly that this vaccine is known to cause this issue. So instead of saying, we're not going to give it to you at all as children, because your likelihood of getting it anyway is so small. Instead of saying that, common sense would dictate that you say, let's not take the risk on these children, on our future generation, because the likelihood of their getting it is so small. And even if they get it, their immune system is still so strong that they'll get over it quickly. Let's rather go that way than bring in the risk of giving myocarditis to these children who will live the miserable life the rest of their life for the sake of numbers, because you want those 6 million so you can get closer to your 70% target, which only between God and the leaders know what's so important about that 70% target. What have you sold? What resources have been handed over in exchange for that 70% target?
Absolutely. I think the wars are different now, Sis Pearl. It's less about, dropping bombs. It's more about capturing a country through a product you make its politicians believe that they need. I don't know how many politicians still believe that, but we're also tying this country into massive amounts of debt with these jabs. Nigeria has just started destroying expired jabs. Other African countries are saying, no, we don't want it. Viva Nigeria. In October, I wrote an article again on Trial Site News asking what happened to tens of millions of potentially contaminated COVID-19 vaccine doses that originated from a troubled manufacturing plant. Aspen had been forced to destroy 30 million doses of J&J in June, not 2 million as initially reported. Very interesting. Aspen was appointed, and they're here in South Africa, headquarters, appointed to fill and finish the vials. But US authorities discovered that 60 million batches produced at Emergent Biosolutions had been contaminated before they were shipped to Aspen for finishing. Not sure what quality control measures are in place. I even wrote to SAPRA, no response. And according to Linda Gale Becker, who is part of this whole trial experimentation program, she said the answer is no. These doses were not dumped by the plant and then landed up in South Africa. But there's a particular point I want to make regarding also local pharmaceutical industry and relate it back to these trade unions. Now, a few months ago, Aspen, Pearl, was viewed very suspiciously because J&J made it a trade condition with DTI and said they would only supply doses if Aspen secured a fill and finish deal, raising questions of a monopoly, naturally. Aspen's also come under fire for cancer, overgouging on cancer drugs, etc., got into trouble in the EU for their aggressive strategies. They were charged 5 million euros, investigated by the Competition Commission. But their shareholders, says Pearl, include a diverse array, including Colonial First State Global Asset Management, what a name, BlackRock, Vanguard, Trade Union Sepwawu, and government employee pension schemes. Now, I'm talking about conflict of interest. What is the impact and what actions should be taken? Trade unions are literally paying for these products that are harming their workers. Your comment?
Well, my comment is, one of the things I did look up in looking at this COSATU issue and discovered is that COSATU is having serious financial problems. Their subscription rates have gone way down from getting something like 74 million around that. People are not paying. I don't know what the reason is, whether there's a loss of confidence. But I do know that COSATU is financially struggling. And that's all I'm going to say, because I'm not going to, beyond that. So I don't know whether they're financial reasons or rationale behind it, but I do know that financially COSATU is struggling. It's out there, it's in the public. You can Google it. It's not a secret. It is an open secret, if anything. So what I will say is that whatever the reason, we cannot sell people who we have committed to say we will protect them. We cannot sell their souls. We cannot sell their bodies for money. We cannot sell this nation. This nation cannot be recaptured again. We cannot sell this nation so that a few individuals will prosper. No, it cannot happen. We have to protect the nation, the land, and the people of this land. This greediness has gone too far. Africa is a continent of so much prosperity. And we know we've always been a target of the West that doesn't have the land, that doesn't have the gold that we have. We own 40% of the world's total reserves of gold. We own 89% of the world's total reserves of platinum. We own 60% of the world's total reserves of chrome and chromium. DRC by itself owns so many, and we have been manipulated over and over for a struggle of our resources. And we will not allow a few selfish and greedy individuals to sell our resources and our land because they are just so selfish and so greedy. It's not going to happen. They're going to go to jail. It's not going to happen. Not on our watch. We're watching. We are alert. We are vigilant, and Simunye, we are one. Watching all of you.
The writing is on the wall. Marina Muhlberg-Smith says governments, along with their health departments, corporations, and courts seem to be captured. Going to be a hard fight. Everything is about controlling the people. Dr. Marie Olivier reacting with shock at the comment, only a mild myocarditis. There's no such thing. Gian,
Yeah.
Tiered gigs Davids, I think the reason they're pushing for one shot for the children is to sterilize them for their depopulation agenda. Certainly, some evidence coming through from scientists in respect of fertility issues affecting adults and potentially children as well, because we know the jab doesn't stay in the arm. Janine van Skalkwyk says the WHO refuses to acknowledge natural immunity. South Africa
Yeah.
has at least 80% immunity now. This is
Absolutely.
definitely
Yeah.
not about health. The
Yeah.
refusal to accept natural immunity speaks volumes. And of course, one of the contraindications to taking the C19 jab is if you've had it before. You should not be taking it. Why are we trying to give those with natural immunity these jabs? Questions we should be asking. Uh, Mel JR says not 70%, only 66.6% to fulfill the diabolical contract made with these demons. Our souls are not for sale. We will break this spell. Now,
Yeah.
Sispa, I was talking, while you were having a bit of a network issue about our young people. We know that there's an intrinsic connection and relationship, and always has been, between the workers and the students. Now
Mhm.
we have students who are being told, take the jab, even
Yeah.
if you've had COVID, even if you might experience adverse reactions, even if the jabs don't actually work, even if it's now Omicron and these jabs were made for Alpha, Delta, or whatever else, you still have to take them. And part of that is because these institutions are funded by the pharmaceutical industry. Let's be
Absolutely.
honest. And if you don't want to take it, then you've got to take a PCR test, which causes false positives because of high CT cycles. Some of them have been proven to be contaminated. There was a BBC report on contamination in the labs. Some of these tests have been found to have chemicals on them that are carcinogenic. We don't care. Choose the jab, choose the test every 2 days at your choice. Now, students are beginning to rise up. There is an alliance that's been formed, legal
Yeah.
action being planned. In KZN, UKZN has said, which is my alma mater, that we won't force you to take the jabs, but you've got to do the test. DUT saying you've got to take the jab. So there is also growing solidarity here in KZN, and events that are being planned, and legal action and demonstrations and boycotts and all of the above. What is your message to the young people and to the workers about the importance of solidarity on the issue of health and sovereignty?
Yeah, solidarity is key. Your strength is always in numbers. Unity. I mean, in Setswana, we say, kopano ke matla. Unity is power. Matla ke kopano. So solidarity is key. Don't try and fight it individually. You've mentioned the University Alliance, UWASA, University Alliance of South Africa. You've got people like Mark on it, and they're advocates there. They have chapters on the different universities. There's chapters at the Northwest University, chapters at Stellenbosch. So go and look for UWASA. They're advocates like Advocate Reg Willis, who are on it right there. Advocate Richard Crompton. They're there. They will help you. Unity is power, but do not give in to this. And let me say this to South Africans who are here. To those of you, this is not a war between the vaccinated and the unvaccinated. And incidentally, I want to say this. Please don't call me an anti-vaxxer, because to begin with, I've had vaccinations. When I was young, I had polio, I had so you to call me an anti-vaxxer is erroneous. I'm not opposed to vaccination, but I am opposed to vaccinations that have no credibility, that are still clinical trial phase and experimental. I'm opposed to those that show that there are adverse effects that you can get. So let me be clear that I'm not an anti-vaxxer. I'm a pro-choicer, which means I'm an advocate for pro-choice. I'm saying don't take my right away to decide. So don't label me as an anti-vaxxer. It's erroneous and it's insulting. I am not an anti-vaxxer. I'm a pro-choice. I'm an advocate for saying that I deserve, as a human being, as my right to dignity as entrenched and enshrined in Section 10, I deserve the right to decide what goes into my body. That is who I am. I'm a pro-choicer. So university students, get together, mobilize. There's UWASA out there to protect your rights. And you need to stand for those rights. Because like I said at the beginning, this whole thing is, Shabnam, it's not even about mandatory vaccination. It's ultimately about your ability to stand as a citizen in the future with rights that you can enjoy your constitutional rights. Today it's mandatory vaccination. Tomorrow it's going to be something else. And if
Yep.
you allow your basic fundamental constitutional rights, freedom of movement and freedom of association and freedom of speech and right to dignity and freedom of religion, belief and opinion, if you allow those constitutional rights to be eroded, you will become a prisoner in your own nation. So I want us to be clear so that it doesn't become a country that's divided, a nation that is split on the issue of vaccination. Oh, anti-vaxxer, oh, pro-vaxxer. No, it's not an anti-vaxxer. It's a constitution. It's a rights issue. And those of us who are fighting, it's not that we're anti-vaxxer. We're fighting for your rights, to say that your rights must not be taken away from you. You and I still need to enjoy these rights, and the next generation must live in a nation that is free, that is democratic. One of the signs of democracy, good governance, one of the signs of democracy is that power belongs to the people. So when power has been taken away from the people, like COSATU is supporting, that power belongs to the employers, and power belongs to the employer has the audacity to say that you cannot come into this place. Why? Because you can contract COVID. Well, so can a vaccinated person. Why? And that's why such employers deserve to be put on the red list. We're going to put you on the red list. Discam, if you know, we're going to put you on the red list. Standard Bank, we're going to put you on the red list. Discovery, if you will not respect your employees enough to afford them their constitutional rights, we're going to pull our purchasing power from you. We're going to boycott them. Standard Bank, all those banks. You deserve, the only language you understand is when we take the money away from you. Pick and pay, we're going to put you on the list. That's right. And we're going to put a green list, and we're going to tell people, take your accounts away from Standard Bank like we've done. Go to Capitec or somewhere else. And the minute you advocate for mandatory vaccine, we're going to mobilize against you and say, take your purchasing consumer power away from somebody who disrespects your right to decide over what goes into your body. Definitely. We know how to do that, and we're going to do it.
In spades, an injury to one is an injury to all. An economic boycott is certainly very active and is certainly going to grow in our country. And South Africa, of course, Red List inspiring similar movements in other countries. Very interesting to watch. Discover Your Life Solutions says, pro-choicer. I love it. And of course, as per, you're quite right that if we allow this to happen now, what's next? Digital vaccine IDs to access basic services, not being able to have an operation in a hospital because you haven't been vaccinated with an experimental product, concentration camps for those who choose to exercise their right to choice. That's where we're headed. But in South Africa, we have a fierce history of resistance, and certainly the world is looking at South Africa and the African continent to lead, and so we shall. Last two questions for you before I let you go. I'm having such a brilliant conversation with you. What is your analysis of the medical, social, legal landscape? And given the year we've had in 2021, from mismanaged policies and worsening health to a spiraling socioeconomic crisis, what should our key priorities be in 2022? So analysis and recommendation and priorities.
Well, I think the main thing that we've been talking about is the issue around active citizenry. And so if anything good has come out of this, the good thing is that we have realized that not all our leaders have our best interests at heart. And so it's been a wake-up call to us as South Africans. And it's been a wake-up call to understand that we do have power. We cannot cede everything to the politicians. We can speak up. We can use social media to mobilize. It's not a coincidence that the government was only able to mobilize 30% jabs. They were so sure and so confident that they were going to get their 70%. And they, much to their shock, there was a resistance. And to the point that some companies are even paying people to get jabs. That's how desperate they become. And to the point that the government even made a statement to say, we're going to, one of the government officials, we're going to jab you at the roadblocks. I mean, really? Jab us at roadblocks? That's criminal assault. For a government official to even threaten you, to say, I'm going to stop you at a roadblock and forcibly jab you. Ko roadblock. Hi, bo. Hi,
Mm-hmm.
kona mado. Hey, no. That is a threat. It's a criminal threat. It can never ever happen. And so that is just telling you that people have gotten to such a place of desperation that their goals, their agenda was exposed, their goals were not made, their target were not made, because people woke up. People were alert, people did their own research, people common sense. We were not led like just innocent sheep to slaughter. We decided to do our own research. We mobilized using the little tools that we had, our little social media platforms. We mobilized people, and the big pharmas with all their money, pharmaceuticals with their billions, we're not able to deal with a small group of people who just mobilized on social media. They shut us out. I don't know how many times I've been in Facebook prison. I've been in prison. It's okay. Now we on Telegram. Now we on Signal. And so hopefully somebody else will make a new Facebook that will be on
Yeah,
Facebook, because the fact checkers that are even there are not fact checkers. They are checkers to check whether your narrative is in line with their narrative. And so their facts, quote unquote, are not even facts. So that's my whole thing, to say that, listen, there is some positive, there is some good. We've learned that we need to take accountability and responsibility for our own destiny, for our own future. We've learned that we have power. We've learned that we must be educated. We've learned that we must be alert and vigilant. We've learned that we must take accountability and responsibility for our own self and others, and each other's look out for each other. We've learned that we have a voice, and we've learned that we can push back and we can withdraw our purchasing power. We've learned that we're not helpless, but there's something we can do. And when we're unified, Simunye, we are one. We can do this, South Africa. We are South Africans. We are people who eat biltong. We eat cook sisters. I mean, come on, South Africans. We know what to do. We the rugby people.
absolutely.
We know how to roll and we know how to rumble, and we will
Yes,
never give up. Go and eat your biltong and hoy your khemere and ginger beer, and let's do this, and let's take our nation back and give it back to the people.
absolutely. While you were talking, Sis Pearl, it occurred to me that, race has been used to divide us as the people, right? Because divide and conquer is the age-old tactic used by those who want to usurp power. So it used to be race, and now it's going to be vaccinated versus unvaccinated. So that message of not letting that happen is certainly an important one. But don't you think there is an awakening happening even amongst the vaccinated, who are now saying booster, another booster, another booster? What's going
Yeah.
on here?
Listen, I know a lot of people who are just saying, angege, not going
Mm,
back. And, of course, the last Zoom meeting we had was on Thursday. Wonderful attendance. We had over 389 leaders on there. And one of the things we did was to teach people how to detox. You can
mm.
detox from long COVID. You can detox from any toxins that have been put in your body, stuff that you did not want, maybe stuff that you felt you had to put in your body because you'd lose your job. You can detox from all of that. So absolutely, take the power back. Take the power
Because
back, and just refuse to be a powerless victim. We are not victims in South Africa. No, we don't know the meaning of that word. We're taking our power back. We're taking our lives back. We're taking control, and we're making our own decisions. And if the government will not support us, then we'll find a way. They say Dibur make a plan. Yeah, we'll also make a plan, not just Dibur. Kaufela will make a plan. Diburu, everything.
absolutely.
The Xhosa, the Tswana, the Msotho, everybody.
Sisonke. Yes,
Kaofela,
absolutely.
Sisonke, Sibunya, we are one. We'll make a plan.
We
As
are
South Africans,
indeed.
we know how to do that.
And if you're looking for detox guides, go to the worldcouncilforhealth.org website. You will find those detox guides. You will find treatments that work. Janine van Skalkwyk says, can we as a nation have a referendum or do anything to rid ourselves of the ANC? I know, Janine, that now independent candidates can stand for elections. And I think
24.
the
Yeah.
ANC has miscalculated on this whole C-19 vaccine drama, and I think we're going to see big changes happening in this country. Any comment on that, Paul Kupe?
Absolutely. The independence case was done by a good friend of mine. So I've been holding his hand for the last 3 years. Dr. Michael Louis is actually the one who took that case to the Western High Court initially. And then when it failed in the Western High Court, he brought it to the Constitutional Court using some other different groups like New Nation and the First Peoples Group, etc. But Michael was the one really who discovered that. He discovered that from reading the Frederick van Slybert report, that there was a provision in the Constitution that provided to say any South African citizen has a right to stand for office, national elections, municipal elections, without belonging to a political party. So that was the decision of the Constitutional Court last year. And working with Michael, I also work with Michael. We have a school of governance with Gareth, etc. We've been training leaders online, and the next class will be starting in February, leaders from all over the nation. So in the last municipal elections, we had, for instance, 5 mayoral candidates that were standing there, and the independent candidates movement, I think it was either 4th or 5th after ANC, DA, and the EFF. Then the independent candidates movement was got a large number of votes. So come 2024, there's a message that's being sent out there. If a movement that was barely 2 years old can gather and garner enough votes to be the 4th man in the race, watch this space. Kenako, South Africa, Kenako, watch this space. 2024, South Africans will be voting. And let me tell you, they will be the 70% of people who have not vaccinated, guess what? They're going to remember this. Let me just say this. The 70% are going to be voting at 2024, and they're going to remember people who tried to forcibly put in a vaccination that they did not want. The people who were dismissed from employment because they wanted to exercise their choice. God, 2024, they will remember and they will be voting. All the people who got sick and adverse effects because of vaccination and whose relatives died, they will vote. God, 2024, that's all I'm saying. 2024, watch this space.
People will remember. In Africa, we have the memory of elephants, and we certainly will remember a reminder, of course, always that if you are experiencing adverse effects, injuries, or if someone in your family or your loved one or your friend or your neighbor has passed away after having taken these experimental jabs, please report this to SAVERS, SAVAERS.co.za. My last question for you, Sis Pearl, before I let you go. Saturday, the 22nd of January, is the 6th International Worldwide Freedom Rally. I'm assuming you're going to attend one of those, but if not, if you were standing in front of this rally with a loudhailer in your hand, what is your message to civil society? What can people do to take back health and freedom?
Well, I mean, everything we've said during this whole program, we've talked about freedom and we've talked about the Constitution. The Constitution is the highest law of the land, is the most supreme law of the land. And what it does is it sets out in the Bill of Rights, Chapter 2, it sets out your freedoms. And I've mentioned some of them already. Freedom to associate, all of the freedoms that were taken away from us in lockdown are all the freedom of association. We couldn't move, and movement, freedom of speech. If you said this, they fine you 1,500. Freedom of choice. It was all of those freedoms were taken away. For what? Why were they taken away? One of the points I made, Shabnam, was to say, you know, the number of cases between March 2020, in 18-month period. In an 18-month period, we had 88,900 COVID cases. But in a 1-year period, in 2019, there were 360,000 TB cases. So now I'm asking the question, why were we locked down when the COVID cases, every death is important. We're not minimizing the death. But if COVID, we had 25% of the deaths of TB. So TB, there was no national disaster management. 4 times the number of people died with TB. There was no
Yes.
national disaster management. There was no lockdown. In fact, we don't lock down the TB sufferer. We don't lock down everybody. We isolate the TB sufferer. There was no mandatory vaccine, got TB. So what is so special about COVID that when a quarter of the people die, the nation is closed down? These are the questions that we must ask ourselves. Is TB viral? Yes, it's as viral as COVID, also through particles in the air. Can TB kill you? Yes, it kills you more than COVID. So what was so special about COVID that we had to shut down a whole nation, that businesses collapsed, that people were being controlled, and authoritarianism was practiced, and that we were forced to wear masks? And now this week, all of a sudden, they say we're going to downgrade the pandemic, which was never a pandemic. Because if COVID was a pandemic, TB should have been a pandemic.
Right.
If COVID was a pandemic with 88,900 in an 18-month period, then TB should have also been defined as a pandemic. So it was never a pandemic. So now they say we're going to downgrade it to be an endemic, which means it's going to go down to flu status. And of course, we all know that COVID was flu from the beginning. It's a mutation of SARS. It's always been flu anyway. It's always been flu. The number of people who've died from flu is on par with the number of people who died annually from COVID. So freedom, guys, your freedoms are entrenched in the Constitution, the highest law of the land. Don't let anybody mess with your freedoms. Stand for them, fight for them, and don't allow any person, any government, any party to take away hard-won and hard-fought freedoms. We must stand for them, and we have a responsibility to the next generation to protect those freedoms. They must not be born in captivity. They must be born in freedom. Giddy born free. We talk about born frees. Let them be born free and not born in prison. So yes, just
absolutely. I hope you get to deliver that message. I hope you get to deliver that message on Saturday at a Worldwide Freedom Rally or any one of the upcoming ones. Pearl Kupe, activist and lawyer, thank you for joining us on The People's Voice and for being a voice for the people. Deepak Ishwardas says, thank you, Shabnam and Pearl, for live information. Love your passion. Thank you very much, Pearl Kupe.
Thank you, Shabnam. Thank you to everybody. And remember, don't let anybody take your freedoms. God bless you. Amanda, I wait.
Well, that has been a brilliant conversation with Pearl Kupe, activist and lawyer. Very powerful, very informative, very inspiring. Be sure to share this conversation across all your platforms. Thank you to the People's Voice listeners, viewers, and supporters from around the world. Remember, challenge censorship and share this broadcast across all your platforms. Until the next edition of The People's Voice with Shabnam, Palesa, Mohamed, remember, the power of the people is stronger than people in power. Take care and goodbye.